Take it. So I'm glad Junon's here.
Great.
So we got.
Hi.
Hey,
Hi.
Junon. I'm glad you made it this time. I am so sorry. Last time I completely missed your message because we were already in the meeting.
Yeah, that's okay.
Well, we're glad to have you here this time. So we're just getting started. So I'll just give a quick intro to the meeting. You know, Heather and I have worked together for many years, and you know we've been so used to traveling for work and doing industry meetings, and of course networking with everyone afterwards. And when the pandemic hit and all our travel stopped back in March, we realized we were missing out on opportunities to network with people. And so we decided to put together this group and see if other people were interested. And, you know, as luck would have it, there's a lot of interest. We did our first meeting last month and had just shy of 10 people. This time we had almost 25 people actually registered. I don't know if we'll get everybody, but it's growing. It is meant to be a casual conversation. So our goal here is to have everybody, you know, ask questions if they want. If you don't want to, you can just listen in. The session is being recorded. So we will be posting it online afterwards. So if you've got private IP protected questions, save those for later. You can connect with everyone and ask those offline, but anything else is open for discussion. For this session, we're really glad to have our friends from JSS Research join us. And we picked the topic of pharmacovigilance personally because I know very little about it other than it's a key aspect of a clinical trial and we support it in our technology. And I do know that we get asked a ton of questions around it. So we felt it was a pretty good topic to lead with. And we're really glad to have the team from JSS here and Homaira to talk to us a little bit about PV. And we have some questions for Homaira, but again, for anybody who's joining, if you've got PV questions, by all means, you know, let us know and Homaira will do her best to answer. So with that, I'll turn it over to Homaira. I'm going to hide the slides so that we have a full screen, and Homaira can kind of introduce the topic and herself, and then we'll get started. All right, so Homaira, it's off to you.
Yes, just. Okay, thanks everybody, and good evening or good afternoon if we are not on the same time zone. I am very happy to be here and appreciate the opportunity to having this event to exchange our information, and if there any PV specific question or discussion, I'll be glad to answer to questions. Just a quick introduction of myself. I'm Homaira Muqaddar, and with a MD background, I hold an PhD in clinical research and drug development in France. With almost 10 years of working experience in Europe, Western Europe, mainly in France, Belgium, and Western Europe. And then I got a master's degree in clinical pharmacology and focused on pharmacovigilance and drug safety. And I'm very happy and proud of being a part of GSS team for now almost 3 years. So I'm responsible of pharmacovigilance management and also medical affairs and medical monitoring of clinical trials. As you know, JSS is a full service CRO providing, as I mentioned, full service from phase 1 to phase 4, all ranges of studies and clinical trials for pharmaceutical industry, and we have For PV activity, we provide for all phases of study based on the protocol and also a sponsor's requirement. We can have different PV related tasks by project and by protocol. So if you and pharmacovigilance team and JSS, currently we are 3 people. I'm very happy to have 2 brilliant and very excellent team and pharmacovigilance, and all of us, we are healthcare professionals with background of MD or pharmacist, and this is what is required by health authorities to have the medical or pharmaceutical background to have a PV responsibility. So, as it was mentioned, the topic for this evening is pharmacovigilance. For you probably, Chris, or for all our guests, pharmacovigilance is a science of detection, assessment, and analysis of safety information in clinical trials from phase 1 to phase 4, or even post-marketed active or passive pharmacovigilance for safety assessment of products. So pharmacovigilance exists from the beginning of the life of a product until it's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing safety surveillance. So it's never end. It never ends. Even it's a very old and aged product, still is surveillance, and the observation for safety information is ongoing. And I don't know if you want me to discuss about what is all tasks, or you want me to base on response to questions if you have.
Yeah, no, we've got a few questions.
Yes.
First off, so I think what you're saying too is, as a career choice, because it's because PV goes on post-market, it's probably a pretty good career choice because it's never really going to end. Right?
Yes, never end, because it's, as you may know, even for all studies, at least one objective of the studies or a trial project is safety.
Right.
And when a product is unmarketed, it's ongoing observational studies, or even out of study. Regulatory agencies require all market holder authorization holders to collect safety information through the product life. So it's, yes, it's a good career to choose. Perfect.
Yeah. So having been working in clinical trials since 2001 now, is it a better value now to track your adverse events and serious adverse events electronically or on paper? Because I've still seen both. I've seen some sponsors for some reason want to track their pharmacovigilance on paper through a paper system. But coming from the EDC world, we know from our perspective, it's a lot simpler and faster to track it electronically. So can you give us a little insight on paper versus electronic?
I would suggest it's with the technology progression, and also we are expecting to have artificial intelligence in the coming near future. I would suggest having all electronics, but beside the technology wise, I would suggest that it's better to have a database, electronic database. It's very easy for the company, for if it's for example, if it's a study or at the preclinic or pre-authorization stage, the all safety data can be consulted very easily, and it will be easily accessed to the data. And also for post-marketed products, regulators often ask market authorization holders to present the safety profile of a study or of the product, sorry, in a report. We call even, for example, in Canada, PSUR, periodic safety updated reports. So it will be much easier to gather all information and electronically, and extracting as a line listings and presentation, and also to present data based on several, divided in several categories. For example, spontaneous cases, study cases, and within the spontaneous cases, we have several sources and sources that data came from. Mm-hmm. For example, from healthcare professionals, from patients, from literature review or screening, from regulatory agencies, databases. So all those data can be centralized by the pharmaceutical companies in one single database, or ADC, or any electronic data capture systems. So it will be much easier for pharmaceutical company to present their data. And
right. Okay.
Also in a summary table or line listing or reports, etc. So it's much easier to have. You mentioned that you see still the paper forms. Yes, we also still have for studies, and within a study we can have both forms, paper or electronic forms. But by the end of the day, all paper forms are data captured.
They're transcribed electronically.
Yeah.
In a database.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, perfect. Yeah. Junon, did you want to introduce yourself, and do you have any questions?
Yeah, I mean, I have a question actually. Yeah. So I have a health science, I have nutrition, clinical nutrition, and human kinetics background, and I've done a postgraduate in clinical trial research, is something I'm interested in, and so I've done some volunteer work. I don't know if you know Apollo Research, where they it's near Toronto, like sort of more western part, where people are taking marijuana to control their chronic pain. Mm-hmm. And now obviously marijuana is everywhere. Yeah. It's medicinal. So I did some volunteer just to get some experience to know how they're gathering data. And I find that it's kind of like challenging to actually, I think, enter unless you know someone who was already in research. So that's why I was like intrigued by your group to sort of get more information because I find research very interesting. So one of my questions is that, for instance, I actually have two questions. One is, let's say if you have a product like Tylenol, do they have to report let's say once every 6 months? I mean, it's been in the market for so long. Do they have to be as careful in terms of their reporting as a new drug that is on the market? Because, you know, something that, you know, has been quote unquote proven to be safe, how closely do they have to monitor it still? That's one question. The other thing also is that I worked, actually I was working in a clinical team where we actually were reporting adverse events. So I was probably sending reports to you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, well, the thing is that now I was working for a company that was like because we were working for pharmaceutical companies because they had to gather data about the new drug. One was for arthritis. Probably you know it was an injection. Advil, what's the name? Anyways, it was an very expensive. One other one was for MS, multiple sclerosis. So they had to gather data. So I'm sort of familiar with those forms and all these questions we had to, ask these patients to send it to you for review. But my question is that often when in the back of my head, a few people, when they have a serious illness, only take one medication. I'm always sort of concerned about, like, when you actually combine more than one medication, how do you differentiate what is doing what? You know what I mean? Like, is it because of the drug or is it because you're taking 5 of the medication? And I find as people get older and we have an aging population, you can get to a point where, especially when I worked in clinical nutrition, I mean, the person themselves, and I asked them, so what are you taking this drug for? So I don't know. The doctor said I have to take it. So I think people's like minds, if you take more than like 7 or 8 drugs, you don't remember the name. You just know it's a red pill. It's like just the size of the pill and the color. That's about it. Okay. So how accurate do we know what is causing what at some point? I'm confused. That's what I'm saying.
Testing. Yeah, confounding factors for sure.
Yeah, I mean, seriously.
Yeah, and I know in this, obviously the studies we design, we allow for the tracking of concomitant medications, but that's a great question. Humaira, how do you and your team track that? Not only track that, but evaluate, those con meds, and if perhaps they're responsible for the adverse event versus the study medication or device itself?
Yeah.
Yes, well, for first question, regarding the example of Tylenol, for example, yes, regulators wants to get all old medications be monitored by pharmaceutical company, and even if it's generic, so brand company and generic company both are responsible to gather all safety information. And as I mentioned before, for such a kind of products that are on the market for several years, and this is a passive pharmacovigilance. It means patients, pharmacists, physicians are reporting those adverse events or safety information spontaneously, or active pharmacovigilance for those marketed products based on phase 4 studies, observational on non-interventional studies, etc. So all information is gathered by the company who marketed, who hold the authorization certificates. Okay. So, and in this context, all information comes on daily basis from client service, from pharmacovigilance department, medical information department, from, as I mentioned, in media, social media. For example, a patient is taking Tylenol, and on social media and Facebook of the company report that I'm taking Tylenol, but gives me nausea, for example. So the company has a dedicated assigned person to follow up, to screen the social media platforms to get all safety information. Once all information from different departments or different sources comes to the PV, pharmacovigilance team should enter the information in safety database. And again, it's every 6 months or once a year, yearly, or every 6 months, based on the safety profiles of the drug. The pharmaceutical company should provide a report, should create or develop a report, write a report for that. And mainly for PSUR, for example, for periodic safety reports, the date of the date that the product was received the notice of compliance, NOC, this is the birth date of the molecule. So from every year at that time, the yearly report should be written by the by the market authorization holder. Now, it's not reported to regulatory agencies unless regulatory agencies suspected some safety issues or safety concerns on that product, and they may ask pharmaceutical company to send that annual report to agency.
Mm-hmm.
This is on post-marketed. This is the question regarding Tylenol.
Yeah.
And then for combined, it's okay for you. I didn't.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. So in other words, it's. So
I too had no idea how that part of this was done.
Yeah. So if I understand, when they have the product, it's been approved, and phase 4, and then at the date when it went on the market, every year the pharmaceutical company actually gathers the data, and they have a report, and let's say in case the regulatory bodies say, you know what, we've noticed something is kind of off, then they already have the data and you just have to send it off. But they don't have to if they've been on market for many years and there's a good sort of safety sort of status to the drug, like Tylenol, for example. And so in other words, the company itself is always sort of like keeping an eye on its products, and they do that every 6 months to a year, based on the date, the birth date of that product.
Exactly.
Okay.
So every year, regardless it's required by regulatory agencies or not, the pharmaceutical company is mandatory. It's a mandatory report. They should keep that report.
Okay.
And it's based on the sale, patient exposure, and the number of. This is a very standard format and template, and ICH and SIOMS group have a specific chapter on that, the periodic safety updated reports.
So that's why it's, if you work in that field, like you're guaranteed a job. COVID, no COVID. You're immune. You're like, I'm there until I drop dead.
This is a good choice of career, as I mentioned.
I know if I've taken something that's over the counter, even if I did have a side effect, I probably didn't report it, and I probably didn't tell my doctor about it, et cetera, et cetera. And when I do tell a doctor about it, does the doctor actually activate and do something? I would imagine, unless it's a dramatic impact, a very small percentage of that actual feedback gets up the chain to anyone. That's true. Which is,
yeah.
No, that's a good point. I mean, for me, it would have to be, something dramatic, like a elevated heart rate or
allergic reaction that makes you go to the hospital versus just a little itch.
Yeah. But you know what? It depends also, like some people have more allergies than others. So you think to yourself, is it only me? Because I had a reaction. It wasn't even medication. It was a food that I bought. I mean, I think most of them had, like, you went to a restaurant, you eat something that did not sit well with you. That's one thing. But I've had an allergic reaction, which I was like really shocked by. I bought some frozen fruits, just Loblaws, and you open it, you do a smoothie, and within 15 minutes, I'm like, I had like, intense abdominal pain. But I did not report it because you think, oh, it's only me who's sensitive. But how many other people think, oh, it's only me? I mean, maybe I have like hypersensitive to something there, but I don't want to alarm everyone. So I totally agree with you. I mean, I'm sure that with all the chemicals.
Yeah. That happened to me when I had to have a medical test, and they had to give me the injection dye. And apparently one of the side effects that's infrequent is it makes you basically almost go blind vision from sort of any of your far vision is fine, but your close-up vision in the sort of 4 feet in front of you basically is blurry, like you're looking through water. And they just sort of shrugged it off, and they said, well, how are you feeling? I said, I can't really see 4 feet in front of me.
Hey, that's a side effect.
Not only did they not write it down in the chart, because the next time back they gave me the same drug, I don't think anybody reported it. So it's interesting because you guys have such an important role from a safety perspective, but it's really in the hands of the people who need to report it.
Yeah, and it's only that when I think about it is that when you buy frozen fruit, it's not a medication. You know what I mean? And you don't think about, I mean, those berries going to do something for me. And it's because you don't have any health issue. I think if let's say you're sick, maybe you're more maybe on the alert, but because, you know, I don't have any health issues, so I'm thinking I just put it under allergies. But when you think about it, is that, is it really an allergy or because it's toxic?
Right.
Yeah.
If you have a healthy body, when you think about it, like I had these thoughts, like if you get a pack of cigarettes, okay, you look at the ingredient list. If you're healthy, you should have an allergic reaction to it.
Yeah, you would think.
I mean,
It's segue into something we were talking about before the meeting, which was when it comes to adverse events, there's obviously that level of it could be, maybe, probably is, and then there's serious adverse events. And I know, you know, Hamara, about, and maybe it's something you can speak to a little bit, that a little bit around that process for anybody who might be on the call or listening to it after, who's going to run a trial and thinking about managing those things. The A's are one thing and the SAEs are kind of another thing, and sort of any best practices or suggestions on how someone might want to think about managing that, particularly if maybe they're thinking about their first trial. They haven't done it before and they're thinking about managing it. Obviously they can outsource it to somebody, but from a, I mean, we come from a technology perspective. Any sort of tips or best practices about making sure that your reporting and the process of collecting all that information is as easy and seamless and clear as possible?
In a clinical trial, it's easier than spontaneous to control the situation, because in spontaneous, for spontaneous reporters, we don't have, the pharmaceutical company does not have control.
Mm-hmm.
They highly recommend physicians, pharmacists, and also patients, nurses that are exposed to such a situation to report. In Canada, it's not mandatory yet. It will become. But for example, in Europe, in France, it's mandatory. Each physician, if they are aware of an adverse event, that it should be serious or not, they should report. They should file a safety, an adverse event report. The same for pharmacists, etc. But in public, we cannot control but in post-marketed situation. In clinical trial, of course, as per protocol, as per ICH GCP guidelines and good pharmacovigilance recommendations and guidance, we should collect all safety information, and then upon assessment and review of case. This is why PV people or PV team should have a medical or pharmaceutical or background or healthcare professional background, because each information, each case that we receive should be assessed. What is an adverse event? What happened? What else than my product is taking the patient, and all. It's an assessment of several parameters or criteria that bring us to decide if it is related to the product or caused by product, or we can rule out the causality of the product. So if we can go back to the question regarding combined medication or the concomitant medication, it's the same. If a patient in a clinical trial takes the study product and the same patient has several concomitant medication because of other comorbidities or medical histories or for the same underlying condition, this is why we collect all concomitant medication to during the assessment of safety information. We should consider everything. This is why also that investigators are required to do the causality assessment. Causality assessment, unfortunately, based on the experience, we saw that I observed that investigators are not often taking this parameter very in serious. They just check related, but they don't think about the consequence of their decision. And this is why the PV team should go and assess and review the case and go back to the investigator to get their rationale behind the causality. Okay, you said that this is caused by my product. What is your rationale? Did you consider the patient underlying condition, comorbidities, concomitant medication? Was there any interaction between two medications, or this is caused by any other risk factors that is out of completely of this context? So the causality assessment first and the clinical trial stage, the investigator responsibility, and then PV responsibility also to challenge or to accept if it is reasonable reasons or rational or plausibility. And for causality, we have several algorithms and post-marketed and spontaneous cases. Often it can be used, the Naranjo, for example, causality assessment scale or WHO algorithm. But in clinical trial, it's I would say almost all the time, I saw that it's WHO, which is a common standard between all countries and all regulators that is used to assess the causality and relationship with the study product.
Sounds like one of the really important things would be to make sure you have a really good team. I don't know if this was a question that somebody had put out before, but I was just thinking about, as a company that, as JSS worked with companies that need to do this type of work, how do they know they're getting the right people? And I don't know if this is a better question for you, Peter, or anybody else on the call, or even you, Chris.
When you say the right people, is that the right people
making the right decision for getting the right team on board to fit the need that you have for what you're working on? If I was a company that was starting my first trial and I haven't done this before, and I'm thinking about, I need to do all this, but I don't know what I don't know. Any sort of tips and suggestions about thinking about selecting a company that can help support this kind of work?
Yeah, well, essentially when we, it obviously depends on the size of the company that we're working with. If you're working for a Novartis or a Sandoz or a Pfizer, they have their own PV department and they may outsource the interaction with the site. So Homera's group might be responsible for collecting the data from the site, helping the reports get filled in, but then it's fed to their pharmacovigilance group. They enter it in their systems and report it to the agencies. But for smaller companies that don't have their own pharmacovigilance, then we would usually make recommendations and say, this is the standards that are required for all regulatory bodies around the world and where you're running your study. And we have a system and SOPs in place and the processes that will track that. And then it's also very important, and as was mentioned, if it is a clinical trial, we have control over the sites we select, their experience. And actually, when we're doing site initiation visits, we actually spend a significant amount of time going through their requirements and the reporting requirements for doing SAE reporting and making sure we track all the AEs. And because there are very strict timeline requirements for reporting to the agency, especially for unexpected SAEs. And they're, fairly aggressive. So everyone's got to be on top of these things. So we need to make sure that they know who to call and where to put the information so that we can report that information back to the agencies. So Is
I
that,
remember when I was doing these A's, we had to report within like 24, maximum 48 hours. It had to be sent. So it was, and if let's say there was something really severe, it was like the day of, we had to send the report.
yeah, and then, yeah, because it's within 40 hours has to be reported to the agencies,
Yeah.
at least notify them, and then, you know, a full report has to be, I don't know how many, is it a week, or what's the requirement for the full report?
In fact, in general, all pharmaceutical companies require sites or to report all AEs and SAEs within 24 hours. Because as I mentioned, once the data is arrived at the PV department, there is an assessment, the initial assessment to confirm or to review the seriousness criteria, and to make sure that, for example, if an AE is reported, it's not, it does not need to be upgraded to a serious adverse event, or vice versa. It's a serious adverse event, but I don't see any serious criteria presented in the case, so it should be downgraded the AE to adverse event, not serious adverse event. Then once we establish the seriousness criteria and it's confirmed for serious, and another review and assessment to determine if it is serious, expected, or unexpected based on the safety reference information. And clinical trial often for phase 1 to phase 3 investigator brochure, and for post-marketed studies, product monograph in Canada, or prescribing information sheet in US or in Europe based on their own safety information. So we evaluate or assess the case, serious case. Okay, it's unexpected. Now we are looking to the causality, if it's related. If it's related, so we got a reportable, expedited reportable event, a case that should be sent to regulators. We call it SUSER. So if we have SUSER, again, an FDA, per FDA requirement, there is another assessment to determine if it is reportable, or it's expedited reportable, or it's aggregated reportable. It means I keep it if I have more than one, or more than 5, or more than a specific number of cases, I will report it. But now it's not reportable because probably it's related, but it's expected in a population, expected in an underlying condition, etc. But in Canada, as soon as we have a SUSER, we should report it. I just introduction to the assessment. Now, when I have a SUSER, I have 2 deadlines for reporting timelines. For death and life-threatening cases, we have 7 days to report to regulatory agencies. And for all other SUSERs, we have 15 days. So why we are asking 24 hours? Because, as I mentioned, the process is long. We need to prepare a narrative, a description of all what happened, like a history of case, and then put it in a specific form. For example, in Canada and European countries, and SIOMS forms standard, and then for the US cases, and MedWatch forms. So all these case processing takes time. This is why to fulfill the regulatory timelines, we expect 24 hours, and after we have 7 or 15 days based on case assessment.
Great, thanks, Samira.
Yeah, these clearly you're definitely the right person to be asking these questions. How important is it to consider safety at the very beginning of a trial, and like in terms of planning, like writing the protocol and planning? Obviously, some medications and molecules, based on what they are, may have a lower risk profile. Others may have a really high one, and it also depends on the patient population, how ill they are. So how important is it to actually consider safety when you're first planning a trial?
It's very important. It's very important because based on safety, a product can be marketed or not marketed. A study can be stopped completely based on the safety information. And from the very early stage of drug development, the safety profile is developing. So the safety is the main criteria for developing and marketing of a product. It's important to keep for each phase or each stage of drug development a specific safety management and risk and safety management plan and safety management monitoring, safety monitoring to get the trial, to get it through the to finalize, to finish the study. And so yes, it's important to have a safety plan from the beginning, and gather the information that we collect from a previous stage and bring it in the new stage or the upgrade stage. It's primordial. It's very important.
Yeah, and I guess it also that dovetails into Heather's questions about the skill of the pharmacovigilance team, because it could be a high-risk product, but being assessed by a team with little experience, in which case the safety plan could be inaccurate, right? Challenging, yeah. And in terms of planning a clinical trial and selecting the patient population, does safety play into that? Like, is the safety data used to try and identify and segment a potential patient population for testing in a trial?
Yes, sure. Because as I mentioned, based on the information that is collected, for example, if we have a phase 3 trial that is starting the development of protocol, we need to consider the safety information that was gathered in phase 1, phase 2, and even preclinical data, in vitro and in vivo.
Right.
Because based on that one, we establish the inclusion-exclusion criteria. We have, for example, an exclusion criteria, a specific disease, a specific medication that is prohibited, a specific patient population that is not, that are excluded from the study based on the safety information that we got in the previous studies. Yeah, I answer your question?
Yo, you did, absolutely. Yeah.
It's also remember that the profile for the IE criteria will impact your enrollment timelines as well, which will impact the overall timeline of the study and the budget, which everyone's obviously very concerned with as well. So these are very important considerations when you're designing your trial, to make sure that you're selecting the right population. You don't want to narrow your population too much, because then you have very narrow labeling when you actually get your product marketed. And you need to make it easy for doctors to enroll patients into your study.
So then I'm going to make an obvious statement, but I think to a startup, it might not be that obvious. Safety is obviously an integral part of planning and running the clinical trial. It's not something you do in addition to running the trial.
No.
It's part of the initial design, planning, execution, and then ultimately how each subsequent trial in the process is designed and conducted. It's not something you do on the side.
No. And actually in phase 1 and 2, it's usually safety is the first, and then
Right.
efficacy and PK and everything else always comes after. So
Yeah.
usually safety is the first, words in the start of the protocol. So you start evaluating.
Very good.
That actually ties in a little bit to one of the things we were talking about earlier in a question that we had previously, which was around a lot of companies get to the middle of a trial and suddenly they've got these budget overruns and things are out of control and they haven't planned for it and they're not sure and things get out of control. Are there any considerations that you can think of, and I don't know if this is who this is a better question for, but things that a company should be thinking about early on to make sure that they're answering those questions so that they don't run into budget overruns and issues, and any tips for that, that company that's doing their first study and what they should be thinking about when they come to a company like you and say, look, we need to get all this work done, and from a safety perspective, we don't know what we don't know, but can you give us your best advice about sort of some things they might want to think about to make sure that they don't run into a problem halfway through their study? It's a big question, so you can pick
It is a big question. It's not necessarily just focused on pharmacovigilance, but at the end of the day, when your product is being developed early on, actually some people say you almost want to kill the product as soon as possible, because if it isn't going to work and isn't going to get it to market, then you want to kill it in phase 1 or no longer than phase 2, because otherwise you're spending, instead of a couple $1 million on a study, you're spending tens of millions of dollars on a study, and then if you find out that it doesn't work or it's not safe at that point, then you just wasted $100 million instead of $5 million. So ideally you want to make that decision as quickly as possible. So you want to find and collect the appropriate information so you can make an informed decision, and that's very critical. And really safety is the biggest objective for phase 1 and phase 2 studies. Secondarily, PK. Secondarily, maybe look at some biomarkers or some efficacy parameters, and making sure you have the right dose as well, because if you select the wrong dose, you can kill a product just as easy because it may be too low. You're not showing the efficacy. Too high, then you get too many side effects, and then you think your drug isn't going to be effective or doesn't have a safety profile that you can get market it safely. So all of these decisions are very important in making sure you have the right plan and you factor all the information, safety, efficacy, PK, drug metabolism, everything has to be incorporated into your protocol and make sure you're designing the best study.
I think that's good advice for especially the smaller companies that might be pretty precious about something that they feel is of value, but if they can't get those numbers, it's a long road to go down to get a big no at the end.
I have a question. I don't know if people know that it's regarding how many subjects you need for a trial. Let's say depending on how maybe potentially dangerous or safe. Like, is there like a number you're aiming for? In terms of like, let's say if I'm develop a drug similar to Advil, let's say. Is there, depending on the type of drugs, a number you should aim for as a drug company? Can you give me some kind of information about that?
Well, like anything else, when you're developing a drug, it's a risk-benefit analysis. So you need to look at, okay, do you have enough patients to statistically show that your drug is effective and it's safe? And then it also depends, like if you're giving a drug that's a chemotherapy agent, you would expect side effects and issues, and the outcome is either life or death, so you'll take some additional risk. But if you're talking about something like Tylenol or a migraine product, like even aspirin, if you try and develop aspirin today, I'm not even sure that the regulatory agencies would actually let it get approved, just because of the side effect profile isn't that clean for that drug, and considering how many people are using the product around the world.
For aspirin?
So for aspirin,
Oh yeah.
I mean, how many people die every year because of overdose and their livers shut down? Because
what it does to your liver and your stomach, and
it's
not
ulcers.
How many aspirin do they take? I mean, usually it's not like one or two.
The problem is people don't understand that they could be taking, it has something that's like, especially the cold and flu medications, they'll have aspirin in it, and they don't quite realize it, and then they take more aspirin, and they take it too often, and
right.
You take 3-4 grams of aspirin, I don't know what exact, but a day you can kill your liver. So
Okay.
it's a big issue.
So people have this like misconception that is because it's only aspirin, it's not, it's safe, so they actually overdose. But so my question is that, is there some kind of a formula, you know, like to know how many people you should have in a trial for different types of drugs? Because this is something I remember I took
well, it really depends on, you know, you have to factor in how effective you think your drug is going to be. You know, if it has, you know, for instance, like acne drugs, some of them I'm actually surprised they got approved because, you know, plus, and actually it's a very challenging area to study, because when you're doing acne studies, you tell the you know, the teenagers that they have to wash their face 3 times a day and then apply the cream, and then invariably, because they're doing good hygiene, their acne is decreased. So even if they're on placebo, there's actually an effect of the therapy, because you're actually telling them to wash their face. So you might have a 30% placebo effect, but the drug might be 35 or 40% effective. Okay, so the differential is only, you know, 5-10%. Then it's very challenging to show, you know, statistically that your drug works, and then you need thousands of patients to actually show that your drug is effective. Right. Whereas if you give 1 dose of a drug and their cancer is cured, well then, you know, you probably need about 20 people statistically, and, you know, you'd be good to go. But the agencies still, especially for drugs or areas where there's lots of safe, effective drugs, and you want to develop the next Tylenol or next acetaminophen, then they raise the bar, and typically then they say, well, I want more data. And so there's statistics in play, but then there's also regulatory science, which isn't always very scientific, and it's what they feel comfortable with. So they may say, well, I want, well, then they say, look, I don't, in this patient population, I want to see 1,000 patients with exposure over 2 years or a year or something before I'll grant you approval.
Oh, so the regular bodies will actually tell you what their criteria. Okay, so because sometimes I just wonder. I know that when I was taking the courses, that they were saying it's such a challenge to recruit people and keep them in the trial for that period, and making sure they're doing what they're supposed to. So I'm thinking, like, how do they actually know, you know, what to aim for? Because there are so many factors to take into consideration. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and there's some trends. I mean, like Peter was saying, you know, things like dermatology studies or a vaccine study, you're going to get a lot more patients, or something that's more of an OTC approach, where you're going to end up, you know, there might be a stronger version that the doctor prescribes you, but there's also an OTC version, like a allergy medication. You're going to need a wide swath. But again, like you were saying, if it's a cancer drug, if it's a rare disease drug, you might need 10 patients to get all the way to the end for something that's particularly rare. And that's just statistically how many people out there in the world can you even find to even get on this drug, and what risks they're willing to take to kind of move that thing forward. But there's a little magic sauce in there that I don't know that anyone can.
And that's definitely where the statisticians have a role to play in you know, planning these trials. And Peter, to your point, and the regulatory authorities too, when they, you know, when they're approving a protocol.
Well, and you need to negotiate with the agencies. I mean, you should meet with them early. You go in with a plan, you say, here's the information that I have on the product. This is what I think is reasonable. And then you negotiate with them. You try and come in with plan A that might be a little bit less large as far as the number of patients or studies, and see if they accept it. And if they feel comfortable, then you might get it approved. Or they may say, no, I want 2 studies or 3 studies, or want more patients, or need to look at these other factors. But what you have to remember too is the agencies see a lot more data than the companies have access to. And sometimes they're aware of certain drugs having interactions, or, you know, things that they think is important, and you don't know exactly why all the time. But, you know, you have to listen to them if that's what they want. Ultimately, they're your customer. They're not going to give you approval if you don't meet their objectives. So it's very important to discuss and negotiate with the agencies early on. And you have to bring the right partner if you don't have that expertise, because you can go off track, and if you don't control the narrative and the plan effectively, you know, they can ask you to do 2 or 3 more studies than you maybe wanted to do. Whereas if you present the data in the right way, you can say, well, we thought of this is why we're doing this. And they say, okay, it makes sense. If you don't, they say, well, the agencies are always risk adverse. They would always want to have more than less, because
Right.
it makes them feel comfortable. If they, they're never going to see themselves in the paper saying, well, 3 people died because they didn't do this or didn't do that. Whereas if they ask for extra studies and, they're covering themselves, it's to a certain extent as well. So
That's a really good point, Peter, about making sure you're bringing the right support with you when you do have those conversations with the FDA and having that backup. It's a challenging thing as somebody who's new, who's never gone through the process, to try and go in and have those conversations. You really need to have the right team with you.
you really do. And you have to prepare. You really have to prepare beforehand. So
Yeah, and all of this is, there's so many parameters in planning out the trial. Obviously, the sponsor wants to get the product approved, but they have to manage that risk profile across all these parameters so that they don't be too overly aggressive to try and keep it simple and straightforward, but then not meet the endpoints, versus over designing a trial and inadvertently adding too much complication and risk so that it goes off the rails anyway.
yeah,
That would be a great topic for a future conversation, is actually just endpoints. Talking about endpoints and what your choice is, and where's the dart that you've thrown against the wall and said, this is what we're going for. I think it'd be really interesting, like, to think about that, because I mean, people have lived and died by a bad endpoint.
well,
It's a fine line that you have to walk, right?
Yeah.
Well, and everyone wants to study everything, and there's a cost and time to doing that. And at some point, you can't. You have to pick, the most important objectives for your study, maybe a couple of secondary objectives. But as soon as you get too large and too many tests, then the patients won't be interested in joining the study. If the study goes on for too long, again, there's fatigue, you lose patients, and then you're not going to meet your objectives at the end. So you do account for a certain attrition for the number of patients, and then you add extra to make sure that you complete the number that you need to be statistically significant. But yeah, this all has to be planned into the design of the study, the outset. So
it's kind of interesting. I have a little anecdote. I was watching this documentary about clinical trials and so forth, and this lady had issues with her GI tract, and she was told ahead of time, this is a sugar pill. She took it, and actually it really improved her GI tract.
Right.
Like, people say that, double blind. It's like she knows. So then at the end of the trial, she goes to the pharmacy and tries to buy the sugar pill. So the pharmacist tells her, the sugar. She said, yes, I know. And she was really like an angry type of woman.
I want a sugar pill.
Yeah, it's just, I know there's nothing in
medications too.
But it still works. And you know what? Some of the difference between, like when you're not, it worked. So it was like, so that's sort of like, I thought it was hilarious, because most of the time you think to yourself, well, if you consciously know something, then it's going to affect the result. No, not necessarily. Sometimes you consciously know you have to do your income tax return. Why don't you do it? It means
True.
It's all the pain and suffering.
Exactly.
So in other words, that your subconscious mind, again, depending on like the size of the pill, the color, your body thinks just the ritual of opening the bottle, your body think it's medicine. So she's like, I thought it was such a funny thing. So it actually challenges the whole placebo, thinking that if the person doesn't know, then you might have an objective sort of like result. Not true. Not true. Like,
well, and that's, and Peter, you mentioned it already too, in terms of the placebo effect, but also managing bias in a trial.
Yeah.
Both are factors that need to be considered.
Yeah. Oh, big time.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, we're on the hour, so I think we can wrap it up. I just want to thank everyone. Humaira, you did a phenomenal job. Thank you so much for being our guest.
Yes.
And Peter,
And thanks for hosting. We really appreciate the opportunity.
So if you don't want your contact info shared, let us know. But usually we do send introductions out to everybody. And thank you. We look forward to having you guys on the next one.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
Yeah, great to see everybody.
Thanks,
Stay safe.
Yeah,
Stay
thank you,
well
everyone.
out there.
Bye.
Go have.
Bye.
Right. Yeah. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Wine time.
Bye.
Okay, bye.